My first question is, can you explain for our viewers a current situation in your country, in Ukraine, what is happening and what had changed since the Orange Revolution and everything what was happening in the past few years?
Well, it's a very tough spot to do that very briefly because we've been all told that it's a very complex situation that has so many issues that sometimes unresolvable. But in my personal opinion, we're talking about this crisis that will define not only Europe's future, but it will also define the future of the whole international order. It's not a local conflict. It's not a local crisis. That's something that is affecting and will affect all of us, especially those countries like Bosnia that are also Euro-optimists and want to join the EU, and countries that are smaller or have other security issues at the moment. The way we deal with the crisis in Ukraine, with Russian invasion, with annexation of Crimea, will affect all of us in the longer term. So at the moment, we have a situation inside Ukraine that it looks very complex, but it looks very complex just because Ukraine is still in the middle of very powerful, profound revolution. So you cannot tell for sure that something is positive and something is negative, or you cannot deliver a final argument on behalf whether or not the revolution is a success, because it still keeps happening. So as I sit in Ukraine and I reading the news or talking to people, I have as much positive news on the same day as negative news. So even I cannot deliver that final conclusion. What I know for sure that there are profound changes inside this country. This country looks so much different than 2 years ago in terms of just mentality, in terms of public consensus that Ukraine is marching towards Europe, whether sometimes some Europeans want that or not. And in terms of consensus that the way the country was mismanaged in the last 20 years by their corrupt political economic elites must stop. At the same time, the issue with the military conflict is not resolved, unfortunately, largely because Russia keep using it as a destabilization tool, and they're not very interested in resolving the crisis. They just want to keep it as it is so they can influence and destabilize their neighbor.
That influence of Russia on Crimea and all actions of Russia which are happening at the moment in Ukraine are very similar in one way to what was happening here in 1990s and what is happening here in Bosnia at the moment. But in your opinion, what Russia wants to do with countries like Ukraine, Bosnia, and all other countries of former Warsaw Bloc and former Yugoslavia?
Look, when I walk through streets of Sarajevo, it's extremely emotional for me because I'm coming from eastern Ukraine. That is in the middle of absolutely the same war. Because eastern Ukraine and Ukraine largely was backstabbed by a powerful neighbor that throw resources, money, and people at places that was very calm, united, and now it's an epicenter of tragedy, divisions, and hate. And I think, unfortunately, we have this very common tendency to overstate the power of Russia as that, great evil neighbor or great evil power that meddles with everything. Russia is not so powerful as it was during the Soviet times. The size of Russian economy is barely of one in Italy. Russia is hurting a lot right now because of falling oil prices and then international sanctions. So I think in many countries in the region, we shoot ourselves in feet, where we fall for language of division, language of hate, language that divides us instead of uniting us. And when it comes to economic reforms and political reforms, sometimes we keep electing populist forces that actually exploit those fears. So I think that we should start with ourselves first and foremost. If we don't have all those institutional problems that we have, because that's not Russia's fault that we are so corrupt in the region of Central and Southern Europe. That's not Russia's fault that we are not politically cohesive or we don't have strong democratic institutions. We need to strengthen that first, and then we'll be more able and equipped to deal with, powerful neighbors that want to derail our countries from their path to success.
EU is in a big turmoil following Brexit and UK's situation at the moment, and both our countries are aspiring to become members of the European Union. When we look from this side of the European Union, can we really expect to be members of the Union in the next 10, 15 years? And would that European Union be strong enough to help us to reach those changes and reforms which we lack at the moment, as you have said, that we don't do enough by ourselves, but we're looking for others as excuses?
Well, I'm coming from a country where people died under European Union flags. So for Ukraine and for so many countries in Eastern and Central Europe, European Union is not just economic union or not a place where you can get some trade benefits. It's more about a civilizational choice for a much fair and just society where you can reach to the heights of your potentials without elites robbing you of any opportunities. So in this sense, I think that in many countries like Bosnia or Ukraine that are very Euro-optimistic, that want to join the European Union, that believe in this very notion of European Union, I think it's a great opportunity for them not to just follow the list of just traditional things you have to do to become the member of the European Union, but start to develop this European solidarity inside all of us. That's where European Union actually starts. It doesn't start with us having a trade deal with the European Union or visa-free regime with the European Union. It starts with us caring about each other as members of the European community. And it's unfortunately that we all should work together more closely and harder, because in Ukraine, unfortunately, largely public does not care about what is happening in neighbor Poland that is going through a really horrible political crisis. They don't care about Brits voting to exit the European Union. They don't really care as much as they should about Bosnia going through almost the same stuff that Eastern Ukraine will go in the coming decades. We should care more about us and developing this solidarity, and that's where we can, find this foundation to move on. And I think if we do that, we actually don't need to develop any additional stuff to become true European members. In that way, we will become already part of Europe, no matter what, no matter if it's possible to join European Union or not. We will become a much more stronger, united Europe.
We know at the moment that the political situations in your country, in our country, are all divisive, and everybody is using that language of hate, language of all kinds of phobias and everything what's wrong with these communities. But where do you see a chance for your country, Ukraine, and for Bosnia and for other small countries in Europe to move away from those and start changing? Because in your country we are seeing the same politicians for the last 30 years. Here we have the same thing. Where is that source of, let's say, human resources to change this situation and move everything forward?
I admire Bosnia, and especially the story that it tells in terms of history. And for decades, for centuries, Bosnia has been a very cohesive but extremely diverse society where Bosniaks and Serbs, Muslims, Christians would live together absolutely fine. And then when some populist politicians and some outside forces and internal forces suddenly would use the language of hate, that's where the society collapses into war or conflict. And I can tell a lot about language of hate, what it does, because I'm the only openly gay journalist in Ukraine, so I know how politicians would use all those divisive issues when it comes to gender equality, sexual equality, but also ethnic, language divisions, just to make some additional political points. I think that is very unfortunate that we're living in a very obvious crisis of leadership in our regions. But at the same time, when you look at countries like Ukraine or Bosnia, where you have a large number of young population that is not politically involved or active, they don't go to elections, they're not running for offices, and actually they just take a backseat without actually being involved. And it's a tragedy, because if you ask them about those core issues, European integration, constitutional equality, civil rights equality, globalization, we as a young generation, we don't have any troubles with that. We're all on the same page. We don't have all those divisions. So why wouldn't we be involved in defining our future and just instead taking backseat? That's something I marvel at, and it's very tragic. And I think it's very kind of common narrative in the whole our region of Central Eastern Europe, where this huge vacuum of leadership, young leadership, is being taken over by nasty populism, by corrupt elites who just who are robbing us of our future.
You just mentioned that you're only openly gay journalist in Ukraine. Let's talk about that for a moment. Does that makes your life as a journalist harder or easier? But also in your country we have the same situation as we have here in Bosnia. Other countries are trying to influence our politics, our life, and everything through propaganda, especially I'm thinking there on Russia. So how that makes lives of us journalists harder or easier when we are trying to explain to people what's really happening in our countries at the moment?
Well, it wasn't a very easy decision to be in public in a very, proactive way about my personal life. But I felt like when I would cover stories related to civil rights equality, it wouldn't be fair to the audience to withhold that information, that I have an interest in those stories. So it was natural for me to come out. But at the same time, I feel like I can share this story saying that how much equality means for each and everyone. It doesn't matter whether you're being repressed as sexual minority or as a woman or as ethnic minority. It robs you of opportunity, and it robs the country of opportunity, because if you have a sizable amount of people in your country that are leaving just because you cannot they cannot provide them with basic opportunities to just access constitutional rights that are already there in the Constitution. We're not talking about specific rights, just basic rights. It tells a powerful story that we're robbing ourselves of our future. It doesn't matter if you're part of that minority or not. At the same time, I don't think that the story about being gay is just very niche or special. It tells a lot about general equality, something we're striving together, especially coming from countries that went through authoritarian past and very complex story. And it's closely related to journalism as well, because the language of propaganda, language of division, of confusion, is something that, for example, Russia uses a lot. So my personal experience that the nature of Russian propaganda is not to convince you, but to make you more confused, so you don't know what to believe and you don't believe to anything, and then it's very easy to manipulate you as a political asset. So my story as a journalist, as a part of minority, it has been very important, incremental for me to tell that story, that actually you should refuse the language of hate, of division in any way, in any part of society, because that's where actually lies the opportunity for propaganda to exploit and to create more confusion and instability.